Past players, past legends, past legends.
And then Andrew Hunter came on, and he was our government expert, and he was brilliant, and he gave us great insight into what we needed to do to get the Prime Minister involved, which we ultimately did in 2017 or 2016. So it was a huge. I think of all the things that we did, that was by far the hardest. I'm probably second to lifting the club out of the doldrum, out of its doldrums. Doing China was, I think, probably the club's most significant achievement in my time there.
And was the scariest bit in China when you were the first year where you're going to a marquee and Albie Menzel's in the marquee?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Albie, for those who know him, has this unbelievable knack of turning up in the most exclusive environments, and you wonder, how the hell did that happen? How did he do that?
His record is incredible.
It's incredible, and he never gives you a ticket. But the way, but he finds his way in. Yeah. Anyway, I got a tap on the shoulder in the marquee, and it's Albie. And to this day, I don't know how he did it, because of we had Chinese security on board, and they were carrying machine guns, for security, and he got in. So there you go.
Oh,
he's a genius.
Danny Hansen's my other one. That's my mate who walked out of the G and saw a security pass, picked it up, superimposed his own photo on it. He got into, I think it was at least the next decade's grand finals. So the game was starting at 3. He would walk in at 1 minute to 3, carrying a laptop and say, I'm running late. And he never got challenged. He got opening ceremony, closing ceremony of the Sydney Olympics, Kathy Freeman's 400-metre race. He was incredible. The Dane in that way. But Albie's record in that way is just incredible as well.
I was just pleased that he'd found it important enough to come to China.
I don't think you were thinking that at the time, KT.
No.
Talking of the ground in China, obviously you had to invent one, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did a lot of reconnaissance. I think I did 19 trips to China. In that little period, and we couldn't find an oval. They were all soccer grounds. So we found an old army parade ground, which was built in the 1930s, and they were using it as a golfing range. And we looked at it and thought, well, okay, it's got the dimensions, but there's a lot of work needed to be done. And that's to the AFL's great credit. I often they're seen as risk averse or very narrow, but Gil backed this, and we had to go through all the processes, but he backed it, and then they spent a lot of money getting that stadium up. And by the time we arrived, it was pristine. It was incredible, and I remember looking at it thinking, I don't know how the hell we did that, but or they did it, and we were I'm not going to go into all the stories, but it was a Herculean effort. We didn't really know what we were doing. Certainly the Chinese didn't know who we were or what we were about. My first conversation with a government official in China, he said, you can't call it Australian football. It's got to be olive ball. And here's the word, because we think soccer is football. So it was called olive ball, because the ball looked like an olive. I never told Gil that's what they call it over there, but that was where we started. We couldn't. Wow. They had no idea.
Do you think it'll come back?
Well, it's not out of the question. I know that both the reasons that we did it, both the AFL and Port Adelaide, still exist in my mind
bloody oath.
commercially.
Well, that's
But
where I've always said they can't. You know, you can imagine Nord people still with Nord, and I've always said no, you can't. It won't. People don't understand it enough commercially.
No,
and as I've said to a couple of Nord people who are fanatical about it, you're not making it. This is Nord Footy Club. You're not creating another. You can't have three corporate entities. You can argue whether SA is big enough for two. It effectively proved it wasn't because Port had to do the China bit.
Yes.
And what the hell how do you think Nord will survive? And there's a lot of people who just don't get that. So,
yeah. Well, like that's a big question, and I think that I don't want to really go a lot into that because they've got a fantastic group that are working on it now and whatever. But I feel like
you know where I'm coming from, though.
Yeah, I do. I don't know. That's too big a topic, I reckon. But the question around China, how do you if you're the AFL, how do you replace Toyota? If that ever comes to pass, is there a corporate entity in Australia big enough to carry the AFL? And there might be 1,000 of them in China. So that's their thinking, right? Port Adelaide's thinking is, we've still got our China representative employed at Port Adelaide, and we've got a person employed in China just in case, right? They're on scaled down versions, but because what I learned was the international political environment, changes on a dime,
on a daily basis.
Yeah, and so you have to build resilience into it. We had a period of 5 years where we were in love with each other. We were trading well, but COVID changed all that. And now we're starting to try and recover our way. So I would like to think that there was enough good work done to make it viable to go back. And if I was Port Adelaide, I wouldn't close that door.
And I'll go back to Nord. If Nord managed to do something similar along lines with India or whatever, that's for mine is the only way a third team can happen from South Australia.
Well, India's
just
really
using that as an example. You know where I'm coming from.
Is a massive growth environment.
Yeah.
But highly complex, much more complicated than China.
Yeah.
With China, you're dealing with one government, a lot of layers in that government, but one government, and you've got to convince them. In India, it's a caste system. It's
totally different.
Laid up, and much more difficult politically, but they've got the grounds. They've got cricket grounds, you see. So you could actually put AFL grounds in there with much less hassle than we found in China. But it's
probably a different. It sounds ridiculous in terms of you're talking about the same sort of situation, but it's completely different.
Yes, completely different.
Totally different. So,
Do you think your Austereo salesman sort of came out with a lot of those pitches?
No doubt.
Yeah,
well, think about this. Not the Austereo. So I was in the commercial space, but my great task at Nova was to convince an entrenched advertising industry and a whole staff that you should buy an ad on Nova, pay the same price that you're paying on our opposition for 25% of the inventory, because we had a never more than 2 ads in a row policy. So every other ad break in traditional radio, as it is today, is about between 6 and 8 ads.
Yeah.
We said never more than 2 ads in a row. And our pitch was they're going to be that much more impactful because you're you're basically standing alone.
Well, you're not switching off. Yeah.
So that was where the selling skills came in. We had to convince an industry, an entrenched industry, that was a good idea. And that took years and a lot of hard work, a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation. But I think ultimately we were successful. But that the power of a good idea is what I learned through that process. And when you're representing an entity or a club or a product that doesn't enjoy market leadership, doesn't win the numbers, then you've got to create
something different. Yeah,
you've got to do something different, and that's what I learned in the radio days.
Okay, your decade at Port Adelaide, which, let's be honest, Port swung up and down a fair bit. Not so much the playing. I'm talking more financially and manage and all that. And then the anti-Hinkley side of things, and people, Port supporters, not really realising how much that suddenly we were any club is 1 out of 18. It's Port, to their credit, won premierships in the SANFL where they shouldn't have. They weren't the best side, but they managed to huff and bluff and get there through inner belief as much as anything, which was extraordinary. Well, I feel you can't do that, and there's a lot of Port supporters still don't really get that. How did you cope then the ups and downs in terms of, Port Adelaide? Yes, it was playing up and down a bit, but probably playing side's been a bit more consistent than everything else. How did you cope with all of that, KT?
Well, the philosophy that Ken and I agreed on when he first came in, and Koshi, the three of us, we agreed that stability, consistency, and longevity are the hallmarks of successful clubs.
Yep.
And you can't keep knee-jerking and expect success. Now, the EPL and other competitions may have a different culture, but in Australian footy, we felt like the best way to succeed was ride the ups and downs, stay calm, keep an eye on the prize, keep an eye on the strategy, and that would work. And I think that we achieved a lot, and have achieved a lot under Ken's reign. I think that we've been a very, very consistent. Yes, there are moments where we've dipped out of the 8, but we by and large we've been highly competitive. Yep. Our win-loss ratio is
overall is very good.
Is very good. So, if I zoom back and go, okay, has it been a successful program? Yes, it has. Has it achieved the ultimate success that Port prides itself on and demands? No, it hasn't. We played in 3 prelims, I think, and 3 SANFL grand finals and didn't win them, and so that counts against the program. We had, my view is, it's about a 7-year build, like from the ground up to get an AFL side highly competitive. Where a coach has had enough time to put what he needs in place, and then it's about taking the opportunity when you get it. We had a few of those opportunities. We didn't take them. Narrow misses. I can very, I still have nightmares about a few of those moments. But you've got to take your opportunities. And I think there are certainly 2 years where we were, I thought, good enough to win. Maybe
bloody unlucky against Hawthorn in that prelim. Let's be honest. There's a bit of Victorian umpiring as well. Yes.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, there was certainly.
And I was American for Port. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of. Yeah, there was a couple of sort of really narrow losses in
Yeah.
finals. There was a double overtime loss against
Yeah,
the West Coast Eagles,
yeah.
where we thought that we were really competitive that year, and so I look at all that and say, okay, you can have a crack at the program. I think the program has held up pretty well. We haven't taken advantage of some key moments, and everyone will have their view on, is that the program? Is that circumstantial? Is that what is that? I don't know, but there's no doubt, and Ken would agree with this. He's had enough time in the program to get what he needs, and to build what he wants. He's had that time. The club has been good at giving him that time, and so we're now at the point of saying, well, I say we, but I'm sure Port Adelaide feel like this, is that nothing else but a premiership at some point, is going to be acceptable, because under this coaching regime. Ken knows that. Ken understands that. Ken would agree with that.
Yeah.
So by not taking a couple of opportunities, that puts pressure on. But I think that what we tried to do was always zoom out and go, what, the programs as a whole is standing up pretty well. It's solid. We're competitive. We're respected. We're around the mark a lot. So
How about
let's win a premiership.
how hard was it at times to keep Koshy away from the football side of it, where he'd come out with the odd outlandish comment football wise?
Well,
I'm
I think
sure that would have frustrated you a bit.
Yeah, well, I think it certainly did, and I was able to say that to him. There was a couple of things to that dynamic, in that he lived in Sydney. He was often talking from Sydney, not exposed to all the nuance that goes on when you're inside the market, and so and he's paid to talk. It's not like for me, if I could hide, I didn't have to, front up, you front up to a press conference, but I wasn't constantly being asked about it, and he was. So yes, there were moments where we felt as if some comments were put pressure on the team, or put pressure on Ken, or put pressure on the club, but the vast majority of his time at Port Adelaide as president has been nothing but positive. So,
and he's obviously contacts for sponsorship and things like that. So you've got to sit there and go, well, right.
Yeah, but his heart's in the right place.
Yeah, it is.
That's what you've got to,
and the goods outweigh the
Yeah.
bads,
absolutely.
well and truly.
His heart is in the right place. He provided Port Adelaide with a national
Exposure,
profile
yeah.
at a time when we were battling to get out of our postcode.
Yeah.
From a recognition point of view.
Yep.
He was instrumental in that, and that can never be forgotten.
Yeah. Now, KT, I reckon I might have been the one who first said it to you. How much does it mean to you to be the only life member of the Norwood and Port Adelaide football clubs?
Well, it's incredibly important to me. People know this now, but I was a Port Adelaide supporter as a kid.
Yep.
My dad was a Port Adelaide guy. He lived at Brompton. I love Norwood. I feel like my credentials as a football person were formed at Norwood and what I did there. And Port Adelaide, weren't super comfortable with me, a Norwood person, with an SANFL affiliation, coming in to Port Adelaide at one of its worst times of its history. People didn't feel great about that, but to their eternal credit, the Port Adelaide community really embraced me, and so I felt nothing but, support through my time there and since.
Yeah.
So what the privilege of being able to walk into two incredibly good, powerful clubs, organisations, as a friend,
Yeah.
as someone that's welcome, I'll never take that for granted. I think it's one of the great, the great rewards for a life in footy. For me, it's incredible.
Oh, look, and it is quite incredible. There's very few people that John Robinson is the only life member of Glenelg, Port Adelaide. It's very few people where
you can have such an impact.
That's happened, and it is. And
Yeah.
I reckon Pat, I think we're at Uni Oval, I reckon, when I said it to you, KT, and Pat turned to me and went, "You sure, Malcolm?" And that, and I said, "Yeah," and that,
Yes,
and
that's
I reckon you sort of nodded and just smiled, and you didn't say much, but I think you were thinking inwardly, "Hey, that's pretty bloody special."
right. It's certainly special to me as an individual, and I hope, I hope to always feel that love and welcome at both clubs. I know that it was very difficult for both clubs because we're tribal.
Yeah.
Footy's a tribal game, right? And the Norwood, like, as Port Adelaide embraced me, the Norwood community felt weird about it, and I know they did.
Yeah, I know that, but it's funny. I never struggled with that. I can remember you with your port tie on and that in the grandstand at Norwood, and I just mucked around with you. God, geez, that shit tie, right. KT. But you knew I was mucking around. You knew, hey, Malcolm's got no problem with this, and I actually think you probably appreciated that because there were people who did have a problem with that, and I probably mucked around a bit and. You smiled and Pat was laughing, and it was probably the best thing, sort of.
Yeah.
Sort of
well,
thing.
I think you've got to look at it. Yeah, these are traditional rivals. There was a particular spice on it because of the AFL entry.
Yeah.
And the way that played out.
Yeah, true.
And then the manifestation of that was the Magpies playing AFL players in the SANFL. That became a real hot spot.
Yeah.
And I was part of that. So,
yeah.
I get it. I absolutely get it. But I think as time goes by, that those things drift away, and you can just enjoy it for what it is.
Probably you didn't really appreciate it 14 where we were sort of going after Nord had won, and we got, come on, Keith, do a little side pump, fist pump, piss off, yeah.
Well,
sort of
okay,
thing.
think about that, right?
Yeah.
Now that was an incredible game of footy.
Yes, it was a great game. So was the second semi too.
Yeah, it was. So I will have this argument until I am blue in the face about the value of having Port Adelaide particularly, but also Adelaide, the AFL, in the SANFL competition and competitive. Not just making up the numbers, because that's treating the competition with disrespect. Have them so that they can compete and retain the rivalries that are so valuable to the SANFL. You have Port versus Sturt, Port versus Norwood, Port versus Glenelg, Port versus Centrals. These are steeped in history. And if you can imagine the prison bar not in the SANFL and think that's okay, I'm on a different planet.
I get Keith.
I don't see it.
Keith, I totally get that. But here's the Port supporters to have Nord played Port in a night game last year at Alberton, and 75% of the crowd at least was Nord. And that's what's got me. The Port people there have dropped off the Magpies like a rapid thing of knots, and that for me, unfortunately, now, if Port would still have people there barracking and you could still have your banter, and I always say to Timmy G, the Williams Gallagher Trophy is the most important trophy in world sport when we win, and if you lose, it means nothing. They're mucking around along that. That's what you want, but unfortunately, the Port people have all dropped off, and that's where That's what gets me now.
That's a challenge for the Port Adelaide administration
Yeah.
and the football program. If Port Adelaide people are very very switched on to their footy club, they understand what's going on, and my view is you got to make it. If you make it important, it's important, right? And so the challenge for the Port Adelaide administration is make the Magpies important.
Yeah.
If you think of them as a development group, or you are unable to be competitive because the SNFL has made it too difficult to recruit players in, or whatever the circumstances are, if you send the message that it's not important, it's not important.
And
But if you
that
send the other message,
bloody
is,
oath.
no. When I was there, we want to win premierships.
Yeah.
We want to win an SANFL premiership.
And that's what it should be. And that's when,
that's what Norwood wants.
yeah, bloody oath it is.
They want to beat a Port Adelaide side that's going flat chat. And when they won that 2014 grand final, that would have been one of the highlights of their career.
Oh,
It
massively.
has to be because of the other dimension was they beat an AFL product.
Oh, it was. And 19 AFL players out there that day and all that. And some of them was the only one, and he's a bloody good player as well, and all that. Now, that was huge. Yeah. And then where I got angry with Port, where Port have always said, well, no, we value winning SANFL premierships, Adelaide, you don't, stuff you care. When Port played Centrals in the finals 2 years ago, and the ruckman Scott Lysett was best on ground, it's 1 point the difference at three-quarter time, and Port took him off getting ready for the AFL game the next week. And I thought, geez, you bloody hypocrites there. You've always raved on about, and I was angry with that. And also, I actually thought it was dumb. Lysett actually needed the run. I thought it was a really dumb football decision as well. But don't sit there and say we rate it winning SANFL premierships is vital and then go and do that. And that's where I was really angry. And I was there at that game. I'm there as an SANFL nut at that game.
Yeah.
And I said to a couple of guys, I said, this is where they're being bloody hypocrites now. And that's where Port, I think, have lost the plot a bit there. And you're right. They've got to make their SANFL side important.
Well, and I think that's a leadership decision, and and again, I my view, others don't share it necessarily, is that you can do both.
Yeah.
You can make both work, and you've got to treat both with absolute respect.
Yeah. So KT, righto, best players played with and against. And you can go any angle here you wish.
Well, the guys that the best that I played with, clearly, the way that I rate this is those guys who have the ability to elevate their game and turn it on and make a difference.
Yep.
Now that sounds
no, that's
obvious,
fair. Yep.
But that's not easy to do.
Yep.
And not a lot of players can do it, right? Blokes that I played with and against that could do that. For us, Asian McIntosh routinely did that. Ruse and Pert in the Fitzroy days were outstanding in that space. You had blokes like and this was a byproduct of an incredibly strong SANFL in my time. But
yes,
the blokes like Kernahan, Mott and Motley, and Platten. These blokes you'd stand them every week. These sort of guys. But they are in my mind right at the top of the tree. I used to love watching Brian Peake play. I loved Morris Rioli. I love Cyril Rioli. I love the great players, and there's a lot of them. But that group I just mentioned there, I saw that happen up close, and it's pretty special.
I'm going to close with a different one here.
Yep.
I want you to try and describe Pat's influence overall.
Sorry, what was that?
I want you to do. I'm going at a different angle of closing here. I want you to describe and fill people in on Pat's influence on everything.
Paddy's influence.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, it really, people, when they're making speeches, they always recognise their partner. But think about what I think about is I was allowed to be completely focused, stroke selfish in my preparation for an AFL career and then a national radio career and then a CEO role, which is, as you know, 7 days a week, full bore. I was allowed that opportunity because of the sacrifices that Paddy made. We had 2 kids. Everything to do with our house, our move. We moved to Sydney and Melbourne 2 or 3 times and back. Paige was playing international tennis. Paddy took her on the road all around Australia to make that happen.
I'd forgotten that. Yeah.
Brad, was involved in everything through. Everyone with high school kids knows this. They're involved in everything. Paddy did that. My life was 5 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. not present, and just about all year round. And if you then add the dimension of, for 10 years of my radio career, I was traveling interstate 3 days a week as we built the national network. Every moment I was away, Paddy was holding the thing up, everything up. And we have a fantastic relationship with both Brad and Paige and their partners, and a really high functioning family unit. And that is all about Paddy's commitment to us. That's how I would describe it.
Look, I knew you'd appreciate the chance to actually give Paddy,
I do. Thank you. Yes.
Paddy the rap that she should get. And look, as I said, I actually go back. I've known Paddy longer than you, actually.
Well, high school sweethearts too.
Yeah, but
so
no, Paddy played.
Right.
Paddy's sister played netball with my sister, and ridiculous. So I knew Paddy actually before you when I met you. I was thinking 79, I think. So yeah.
Well, she's been. Look,
she's a rock.
We were in grade 1 together. We were in every classroom through primary and high school together, and got married at 21. So our life.
Was she always the loudest one?
Yeah, loud, very loud, very loud, very. I wasn't always the boyfriend. I was just there, right?
Yeah.
We were sharing homework, but if you think about every memory, we lived in the same neighbourhood, right? So I used to walk around to her house.
It's pretty
every
incredible.
memory from 5 years old to now, we share.
Yeah,
that's a pretty unique thing.
Yeah, that is bloody unique. Yeah,
and we value that.
No,
destined in the stars.
Yeah, no.
Yes.
No, Mrs. Footfault's a pretty special lady.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Every now and again she inserts herself.
Oh yeah.
In and as she should. Just to realign the balance of things, and I've needed that as well.
Yeah, no, I've been involved in a couple of those, if you remember, Keith.
Fair enough.
Yes. Hey, KT, massively appreciated.
Thank you, mate.
No worries.
And,
thanks, guys. Really enjoyed it. What a trip down memory lane. I appreciate the time you've spent on it.
And I'll send it through to you and all when it comes through, and I'll catch up. Thanks, KT.
Great stuff. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, mate.
Liking this podcast? Please like, rate, and subscribe.